Well, first thing, I know that you were in HR for many years, and I actually felt happy because I majored in organizational psychology. I started my career in human resources as a talent acquisition specialist. And I always thought, since I was studying, that the future should be CHROs becoming CEOs. And you are one of the few that I've seen and that I read of that were CHROs and became presidents of a large multi-billion dollar corporation. So if you can give us just a little brief background on how you got there and then what you're doing today, and then we'll go into the pandemic, the global workforce, creating value for stakeholders and shareholders, and so on and so forth. So just give us a little brief on you, please, and how you got to the top.
Well, Marco, it's really interesting you point that out because there's not a lot of people that do get that or appreciate not only the rarity of it, but the I think the potential value and importance of it. Um, so you're right. My career trajectory really started out in HR, and I had great foundational experience at PepsiCo early on in my career, where Pepsi really groomed HR professionals to be knee deep in owning business results, business impact from an early stage. So that's kind of how I really strengthened my early stages of my business career. And then I went to Nabisco in increasing positions of responsibility, and Nabisco was going through a lot of transformation, a lot of competition, and then we really turned that business around, competing against the likes of Keebler and Pepperidge Farm, and to the point where Kraft came in and ultimately acquired Nabisco, and then I was part of Kraft. Um, and really, when I think about the people I got to work with at PepsiCo, learning from early stages, exposure to people like Roger Enrico, David Novak, who went on to run Yum Brands, Brenda Barnes, who went on to run Sara Lee. And then at Kraft, having the opportunity to work with people like Jim Kiltz and Rick Lenny, who went on to run Hershey's, Doug Conant, who went on to run Campbell's. Just these are the people that I kind of learned from early on, and they're not only their strategic thinking and their capability, but how they looked at developing leaders and developing human capability to deliver results is really foundational to me. So when Sendent acquired Avis, and they really wanted a kind of a very operational minded HR executive that could transform company and culture, I was recruited by some ex PepsiCo people to send in, and then went in, and over the next few years, we really started to transform Avis from what was back in 2001 a very sleepy, um, a very kind of quiet organization, very strong operationally, but not overly progressive in terms of how they think strategically about the business. Um, then we had significant restructuring of the business, introduced a lot of talent and capability building, and then ultimately went on doing some acquisitions. We bought Budget Rent a Car, and then we ultimately bought Zipcar to get into the mobility space. And then probably the biggest acquisition that I was taking part of was the buying of our international business, which was like a mega franchise, a separate company on the FTSE, and we created a truly global company. And when I arrived in London, myself and my predecessor, there was zero EBITDA coming out of that business. And then when I left in 2019, there was over 300 million of EBITDA. So with that, we kind of foundationally really always the challenge that I grew up with was really plugging in human capital solutions to solve business problems, whether it was right team, understanding customer, understanding culture, changing cultures, holding people accountable. So having, real performance oriented mindset. And I thought once I reached the pinnacle of being a CHRO, then that was kind of my destination. And then I really, the more I got involved in the strategy of the business, the acquisitions, the integration, and I saw the impact that human capital can have on the business results, is when I really wanted to cross over to general management. And I got the board and the chairman to be very supportive of that. And then when we did the acquisition in Europe, I moved out of HR, running other functions, IT, legal, shared services, and then ultimately took over responsibility for the UK, the northern region, and Europe, and then all of international. So when I left the business, we were about 30% of the revenue and about 42% of the profit of overall ABG. And it's shaped now how I operate in terms of navigating with our current clients in a more of an advisory capacity, leadership development, and strategy capacity as well.
I want to interrupt you just a second. CEOs want to know, many of them think that acquiring companies is just about having the money, right? But what is the biggest challenge? You said change management. As soon as you've acquired that company, as soon as you've made that acquisition, is it the culture? Is it change management? Is it blending those things? What was your experience?
It absolutely, there's two things. One is really understanding the culture of the organization you're acquiring, and recognizing if it's one that you need to radically change, or what you need to really protect about it, and what you need to do to evolve the business going forward as a hybrid of the two cultures. And 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 it isn't really about trying to be nice and compromise. It's around really understanding what you have and what you want to be coming out of that integration, and then making a lot of hard decisions that go along with that. And um and I think why I feel really good about where we've been successful is we understood what we were buying. We really understood what we could add value to, and what they were really good at. And we were uncompromising in terms of always putting the right talent in charge to run the business, and with the right performance and incentive systems to drive that. And when I look at the acquisition of Budget, huge success. We were the first rental company to go into this, having the premium brand and the value brand, and then actually Enterprise, which was bigger than Avis, followed suit, buying National and Alamo, and Hertz followed suit, buying Dollar Thrifty after that. And the same with mobility. We were the first to lead in Zipcar, which was how do we keep them separate from Avis, because it's a different business model, but leverage the resources. So a lot of it is understanding culture, capability, and putting the right talent in charge along the way.
As a leader, you mentioned tough decisions. So what has been one of the toughest decisions you had to make operationally, but that you knew that it was inevitable and that the results would be in the end the best results?
Well, if I start with Budget, one of the toughest things is we only took about maybe 10 or 15 people from the headquarters of Budget. And because what we really valued was the field operations, and the rest we viewed as there was some real good strategic, or some operational capability in headquarters. And we just felt that we would take the kind of really specialized skills and keep them, but everything else we had to really shut down, and to accelerate how quickly we can impact change. Because part of this was um, post 9/11, and the company was in bankruptcy. We bought an asset deal out of bankruptcy, and we had to move quickly to shore up their fleet, reassure their employees, reassure their customers, and so it in effect required us just taking over strategically on the Avis side, and then blending together the field operations to be more of a hybrid.
Let's fast forward to the pandemic. In general terms, how did you, as a leader, navigate the pandemic? And in general, what was the real impact to the global workforce and businesses worldwide?
Well, for 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 us during the pandemic, we have a firm that's at this point it's very agile. We can move pretty quickly. I will say the two things that myself and my co-founder we did is we took our salaries and our income down to zero, so we could ensure that our there was no change with our employees, and we can keep everybody going through the pandemic. Um, and we did that for the better part of a year just to ensure plenty of cushion on our side. And then I think we were really aligned ourselves with a lot of our key clients from an advisory perspective in terms of how to make their organizations more agile. Some through um, a more self-sacrifice and making some harder spending decisions, but trying to treat this as you're navigating through a rough period, but make sure what you build and what you have comes out the other end not only intact but better and stronger and more, just more transparent in dealing with your employees. So transparency was key, communications key, and and commitment to your workforce during those rough times, I think, is important.
What is the result today? Sorry. How do you see the global workforce? What was the impact to them? Is there a shift? Has there been a shift between employers and employees? And how are businesses? What is the stage of business today? Are we living a new normal?
I do believe we are. If I just jump back for a second to my days in the travel space, we always talked about this looming threat of more virtual meetings back in the days when WebEx and other tools were beginning to come out, and it never really took hold. And so, because we were always worried about business travel and the impact that would have. What I have definitely seen is what has changed for people is a few things. One is there already was a lot of momentum to have more flexibility as your workforce, as you put more diverse leaders in positions of power, and especially as there's more women CEOs, more women division presidents, the kind of the mindset shift, which I think has been long overdue, is really making sure that you have an environment that is as flexible as possible. Because there was an exodus of a lot of women as they moved up into those executive ranks. So that momentum had already begun pre-pandemic. And then when pandemic happened, now when you do virtual meetings, it used to not feel like a real meeting was happening. It always felt like I needed to be in person. And so now you have people focused on what we're seeing a lot is people want joy in their work. They want purpose in their work. They want that flexibility and agility. And so and now when you have a virtual meeting, it feels like I've accomplished a real meeting. And so when you start to add all of that together, it is kind of the perfect storm that I do think there always is a need and a desire. I still have it with some of my clients. They would like you to come in and meet with people in person, but it's probably one fourth of the time versus before it was always the majority of the time. So I think we are living through a new normal, and I think as the workforce focuses more on purpose and work life balance, I think there's a great opportunity for companies to continue to harness that and leverage it without feeling like if they're not in the office, I'm not getting my fair day's pay for them. Because I actually think sometimes you have to help employees take a break from sitting in front of a screen all day, because there's lots of opportunities for productivity improvement. What you really want is you want what we're finding is companies want growth, they want engagement, they want people feeling connected to the mission, and so you almost have to make sure you don't turn a blind eye to that from a company perspective, and find those opportunities to create that connection, whether it's in person or just breaking the daily routine. But I do think going forward, the workforce today is expecting more flexibility, more agility.
So would you say that many companies are already rethinking their culture? Do you have to change your culture to become that a more agile and more understanding, engaging company?
Um, I do. I think the language leaders use is important. I think, um, I think companies are making mistakes when they talk about, I'm not getting my value if you're not in the office, as opposed to focusing on impact and results, and holding people accountable.
One question. I'm sure you've already mentioned some of the elements on how you help your clients create value. But that's the question. How do you help your clients? What is the pathway to create value for shareholders and stakeholders and to really create good value for the company?
Well, I think, and this is part of the reason why I'm dedicating some of my life to this at this point, is it always has been and always will be about the talent that a company has. And I think what it's tricky to sometimes figure out, because human beings are not, they're not a balance sheet. It's very hard to know how someone will perform under pressure or with circumstances that arise. But I think the more time and energy companies put into assessment work, so they understand who they have, and then development work, so you are very transparent around what development needs exist. So, for example, with some of my clients, one of the things they're doing now more than ever is, we're working with them to assess talent on the front end,
Mhm.
and then we put in front of the company those candidates for CEO or other key C-suite jobs. And then immediately when they start, the day they start, there's a very clear roadmap, not just about orientation to the job and meeting with investors or meeting with, key constituents, but it's, here's the things that came out in your assessments as your development needs. And these are the things we're going to focus on to help you be successful. So it's okay that you have development needs day one. Know that the board still chose you and they're picking you and they want you to be successful. But you're going to have to work on these on an ongoing basis and demonstrate to us that you're growing in that area. And it's usually about something to do with more so their leadership capability or leadership style. Not that it's defective, but there's pieces of it that need to really shine through or need to be important in leading cultural change. The technical stuff is almost easy to handle. You can line them up with the right subject matter experts, but helping them succeed as a leader and helping them navigate communications with the board and with the company so they get off on the right foot. I'm seeing a lot more investment in companies to help the top of the house be better at it so they can help the broader organization be better. So that's a huge step in, because it's very expensive to bring on a new leader, and getting them, if they're going to shift strategy, they really need to make sure they understand what the organization's capable of, and then how to resource it either inside the company or externally to get to the organization to a point it needs to go. So more time spent on assessment, development, to drive the culture, to drive the results, as opposed to just jumping right into the technical sides of the role.
You're actually already answering another question I was going to ask you, and that's if you have seen many C-suites in different companies changing, should they be changing? Is it late to change, or is it never late to change?
Well, the one thing I'll add on to my comment is where I think there's a huge opportunity, and some of the very big classic strategy firms, they stay away from the human capital side, and they stay away from it because it can get messy sometimes. It's not as formula driven as classic strategy work. And I think the big opportunities for companies and the really smart, forward thinking companies, they they always balance strategy with with the team that can deliver or execute on it, or how do you augment that. And I what I do believe is more companies are thinking about it, but I would say we're still in inning 3 versus being in inning 8 in terms of companies really putting this in the forecourt in terms of priorities.
If we left Earth and came back in 10 years, how would we see the dynamics between employers and employees? How are we going to see the workplace? Also, a question: what's your thought on multi-generational workplaces instead of the average age of 28 years old, like many startups? So, what will we see if we come back in 10 years, based on all the data that you have, your experience, and the trends that you see are going to change the workplace, the C-suite, and the dynamics?
Well, I think I think the big thing that's going to change is companies are going to put um, talent and teamwork on an equal playing field with strategy and with financials. And 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 I think the best companies are going to put it first and foremost. And I think how they measure, how they reward, how they develop is going to be more consistent, and it's going to be more non-negotiable. And an example I'll give you: in the pandemic. Now, I'm very fortunate. A lot of the clients I work with are really committed to the human capital development space. But far too often, I saw some of the first things to get cut were any development opportunities for the broader workforce or for high potential talent. And and I think the great resignation, it's the big thing that's behind all this. It's engagement and it's development. If you ask 100 young professionals what they want and what they need, it's engagement and it's development. And then they want to see the connection to the purpose, and they want to see the impact that they're having on the business. And it doesn't matter your industry. And quite frankly, it doesn't even, the compensation thing is not, I just don't think that's that big of it's not as big of a deal. They want to be paid fairly, don't get me wrong. But um, so my hope is if we were to leave Earth and come back in 10 or 15 years, we would be moving beyond these conversations around engagement, around tying people to purpose, and investing in the development. And that becomes a non negotiable. If you think about the finance side of the business, if you were to do an x ray of an organization as to how much money and time is spent on all of your accounting procedures, because people will go to jail if they screw up accounting. And you have an audit committee that's going to want to see all these steps taken. So when you think about the investment in infrastructure, you think about the investment in auditing, you think about the investment in systems and tools, such a significant investment. And I'm not suggesting it's not wise. It is wise based on problems that we've seen in the past. But the accounting issues we've seen in the past, in my view, are a fraction of the challenges with human capital in terms of development, engagement, assessment, and connection to mission and purpose and impact. And so my hope is that as time unfolds, that will become more non-negotiable in terms of investments businesses make. It becomes more transparent, and it becomes much more of a priority as opposed to sometimes some of the first things to still get cut in a downturn. And to answer your second part, multi-generational, I actually think, a lot of the young talent that's coming into the workforce is, if you really are harnessing, focusing on mission and purpose and the impact that your role has, I think young people want to learn from more seasoned people. And I think more seasoned people appreciate young people in terms of bringing forward this, not just following blind with blind loyalty, but really making sure your skills continue to grow and develop, and you're more collaborative with each other um, as opposed to more just competing with each other all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real benefit of kind of the multi-generational. And I think older workers are going to benefit from the value that younger workers are bringing in. It's just making sure it's harnessed and leveraged.
What is that movie with Robert De Niro? He's an assistant or a trainee in a
Oh, yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
beautiful. I can't remember the
With
name.
Anne Hathaway. The
Yeah.
So, last question. So, I'm sure this will encompass everything you said. So, the question number one on CEO's mind right now is, how do I get ready for the next pandemic, for the next recession? Not only what I should be doing on a daily basis to create more value for my company, but how can I create and build a better organization so that if another big one comes, we can navigate it smoothly.
Well, I found this when I was running the international business for Avis, and I think it holds true with all the great leaders I've had a chance to work with. Your proximity to your customer and to your front line, there's no substitute for it. And I know top leaders of top organizations, they spend a lot of time with investors and spend a lot of time with financial institutions, as I had to when I was in those roles. But I always prioritized spending time with customers and with frontline. And it gives you a very clear insight and visibility to what's working, what's not, where the risks are in your business model and your delivery mechanism. And then what you do is you really put your best people against your biggest problems and your biggest challenges. You incentivize them, you reward them, and then you communicate in a two-way fashion with your organization. And you spend twice as much time listening as you do talking. And I think if leaders practice that behavior and get out of their office and getting more in the front line, and then they communicate transparently the challenges they're having and what they need from their employees to help close those challenges and those gaps, you invariably find the answer. You always do. It exists. And it's usually deeper in the organization where you have the intersection with the customer. And, and I think that's where there's a lot of effort right now, especially in public companies, with compliance. And so it's very easy to get caught up in making sure you're getting ready for your next board meeting and that you're going to check the right boxes with the board. You're in compliance with all your reporting. But I think the best leaders will be the ones that are closest to the customer, closest to their front line, and are listening more than they're talking, and then they're communicating to everybody progress, connection to mission, and you're rewarding and incentivizing the talent that's helping you get there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you would like to send as a message to the global business community?
I think I've said it throughout it, but it's just the exclamation point is, you know, the time is now to really double down. You think about strategy, something I learned interacting with Bain a lot. They were a phenomenal organization to partner with in some levels. Is where you have to double down is right talent against the right challenges with the right reward system in place. That isn't always money. It could be flexibility. It could be things that are important to employees. But I think a much more systematic and structural approach to the assessment, retention, and development of talent is going to separate those that are going to win in the end versus those that aren't.